Welcome everyone to In the Hot Seat. For our repeat viewers, thanks for joining us again. If you're new to the show, every 2 weeks we put industry experts and our customers and sometimes our dogs in the hot seat for a lively discussion, debate, and even a little discourse as we try to humanize a digital experience. All aspects of the customer lifecycle and now even the employee lifecycle are up for discussion, as well as the technologies used throughout each phase of the journey. This actually is the second episode, if you caught our last episode in our employee experience focus series. And this time we're going to take a look at AI's broad impact on HR and the employee experience. So
yes, we are.
This will be fun.
It will be fun. And, the whole employee experience, I have to say, now my dogs are very active. I have to say the whole employee experience is I've been applying for jobs and I'm getting the response emails back from people. And I thought it was so funny. This weekend, I got one where they said, our hiring team, parenthesis, humans, not robots, parenthesis, will carefully review your resume and give it the attention it deserves. I was like, okay, that's just funny right there.
I sort of feel like that's just a smoke screen and they really were using AI in the background.
I know, you have to wonder if you're trying to be virtuous and actually using humans, or was it just a cover up?
Yeah, I don't know. It smells like cover up to me, but
it kind of looks like it was written by AI. I don't know.
Yeah, right. As I was getting ready for this, did a little search on some articles, and I was reading one from SHRM, the Society for HR Management, and it's interesting that, and I guess I sort of knew this if I had thought about it, but from customer experience, obviously, we've talked a lot about personalization this last year, and it's been a big push for several years, really. But apparently, also in employee experience, that's really coming to the forefront, and a lot of companies are really trying to build out that personalized experience for their employees, particularly around training and development, which makes a lot of sense to me. But I guess there are other areas that were a bit more sensitive, and they were talking about how you can, the personalization piece is good to a certain point, but then it spills over into surveillance perhaps, and there are boundaries, I guess was the point, right?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
And I mean,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know when I was reading something, I think just this morning or yesterday, where they said, there's a new study out at American University that found that 78% of Americans say AI isn't covered or is even actively discouraged in high school. So think about the disparity of that, especially if you're not going to college, where you would then have an opportunity in some colleges to use AI in the process of getting your degree. If you're going directly to the workforce where they're using AI to look at your application, even in some cases do the interview, that's got to be scary.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think, and I mean that's a good point from the experience perspective. If you're applying for jobs and you see that, but I mean just also in the preparation, this frustrates me a lot. And I've done several shows on my other show this year that talks about education and how they're applying or not. And in a lot of cases, particularly in the universities, I've seen a lot of pushback that they're not allowing it at all, which I'm sorry, but I think sticking your head in the sand these days is probably not the most appropriate way to prepare students for their future jobs. But well, why don't we bring our guests in, because I'm excited to talk to Rebecca Wettemann. Rebecca, join us, and then I'll do a quick intro. But Rebecca, CEO and principal analyst at Valoir technology research firm, help enterprise leaders understand, maximize the value of technology investments, over 20 years analyzing enterprise software. Rebecca is one of the most trusted voices in HR tech and employee experience, and widely, recognized as an expert in technology, ROI, guided hundreds of organizations in building business cases for their HR tech investments, named an HR tech influencer and a sought-after speaker and advisor to Fortune 500 companies, including Microsoft, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Oracle, and a bunch of others. Her research has helped shape industry understanding of cloud computing, digital transformation, people analytics, and AI adoption in the workplace. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks. It sounds like I need to use AI to shorten my bio, Mike.
I thought about doing. I did that for myself the other day, and it came out longer. I don't know.
That's all about your prompt, my friend.
Clearly, I didn't do that correctly.
So, Rebecca, let's jump right into it with all that list of qualifications we've got there. You're probably going to be the best person ever to answer this question, but talk to us about the biggest misconception organizations have when they start implementing AI in their HR function.
I think the HR story is really, really interesting because we have this assumption that HR has all the data around skills. And in fact, they don't, right? Today, 13% of organizations from an HR perspective say they have the skills data to be able to effectively plan and optimize for the workforce in the future. Now, how can I possibly think about AI and automation effectively in strategic workforce planning if I don't have that skills data on my employees? So I think that's a really big misconception there. And the reality is that data is in a lot of different places today. So there's a lot of work that organizations have to do from a data, almost master data management perspective with the HR data and skills data to really be able to take advantage of AI.
That's interesting because I say the same thing when I talk about enterprise data in general, right? That we've siloed it through the years with the applications, and I know HR tech's evolved a lot over the last several years. Is that a big part of the up and downside? Like we've added all these systems, now we've managed to fragment the data so badly that it's really hard to apply automation and AI in that space?
I think part of it is the way the technology stack is growing. You're absolutely right, Mike, where somebody said, oh, I got core HR, but then I added an L&D module and I've got skills data there. Right. Or I've got a coaching team or a coaching app and I've got data there. Or I've tried to do something in the evolution toward a skills-based organization, but it's one department's taxonomy or one group's sort of set of skills. So you end up with A, a lot of definitions in different places, B, a lot of data in different places, and then C, perhaps most importantly, a lot of politics about who owns that data, right? So I think what we're going to see, particularly as folks look at how do I really do strategic workforce planning well, a lot of HR folks getting their hands slapped because they haven't done a good job of the one thing that they're supposed to be responsible for, which is really good people data, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, this is obviously just continues another technology wave in HR. I mean, do you think this is different than what we've seen over the last, 20 years or so in HR? Is this unique enough? Is this going to add value, you think, to the function?
I think two interesting things are happening. First, all of those employee recognition apps that we rolled out during COVID to have people virtually congratulate each other are now becoming a really, really interesting source of data. Right? I've got all this unstructured text. So it becomes sort of the 360 of my employees, what everybody really thinks about the jobs that they're doing, which is really, really interesting if I think about how I'm thinking about inferring skills for people and coming up with that more fluid skills taxonomy. I think the other thing is obvious, which is just this is also happening rapidly, right? Yeah. HR tends to be on a slower sort of HR technology cycle than a lot of other areas. If we look at CX applications that change every couple of years, we've got a lot of HR stuff still out there on client server, right? All of that is changing pretty rapidly.
Client server, really?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Okay. So when we talk about that, so that's interesting from an employee experience side, understanding that. When we talk about the employee side, how do employees actually feel about AI being part of their hiring process or their performance reviews or career development decisions or any of the myriad things we're using AI to influence now? And what are all the things we're using it for?
Kristy, I think that no employee says, boy, I want to learn an HR application. Boy, I had fun in whatever my hiring application was. Right? We've sort of gotten to an acceptable level of quality for these HR-based applications, but frankly is unacceptable. right? There's a reason why everybody wrote a Slack interface to their HCM application. It wasn't because the HCM application gave any employee joy, right? So I think what we're seeing now is a real opportunity with AI to say, let me put an agent in front of this, do the important navigation for the employee. They're not learning that interface. And then what more value can I add? So for example, in benefits management, we all go through the sort of open enrollment time, right? How about an AI agent that actually knows enough about me and my family's medical history to recommend the best plan for me and explain?
Oh my gosh, that's cool.
Right? It's those kind of things that we can actually do when we get out of the application and really take advantage of AI to drive that personalization, like Mike was talking about before.
Wow.
I mean, it sounds almost like that puts it, that's kind of the new way that people will use the systems. And that's, I mean, it sounds like a new UX sort of paradigm.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I was talking to some folks the other day who had built an agent for their, we always hear time off and leave policies are one of the ones that they always say we'll stick an agent in front of. The folks that I talked to, though, had done it for expense reports, right? So rather than a huge long policy document about what expense reports, what expenses you could include, and the professional services firms, so they were doing billable hours kind of stuff, right?
Right.
Got an agent to do that. It automatically goes through and says, this is okay, this is not okay, this is okay, this is not okay.
That's so amazing.
A real productivity savings, but also enforcement of a policy that nobody loves to enforce policies, right?
Yeah.
Let AI do that.
Except the AI agent, they do. They like to enforce rules, right?
I would love the idea of having an AI agent in the middle of me and selecting my benefits. Like, hey, here's the plan. Instead of me sitting down with a calculator and a bunch of different printouts and going, wait, well, this one has a good deductible and this one covers more of this and this is a lower out of pocket. And that would be amazing.
Right? Give me the recommendations of the top 3 plans for me and why, and then let me make a decision.
Right.
That's helpful.
Right.
Well, we've heard a lot about AI in recruiting, hiring, resume ingestion, all those different kind of functions out on the edge. But I mean, where do you see the most value from AI as it's being applied to HR now, and then really just over automation in general? Like, where's the real value being created?
I think it's a double-edged sword, Mike, because those areas that are potentially the most value also have the greatest risk, right? So if I look at recruiting, the ability to actually screen everybody who submits an application for a job is beyond the scope of most recruiting and hiring talent acquisition processes today, right? Just don't have the bandwidth to do that. So they're using some sort of automation in there. The challenge is, as we've seen with the Workday lawsuit, it'll be very interesting to see how that turns out, right? Is that, well, it can drive a lot of great efficiency and a lot of intelligent automation of processes. If it's not trained properly, and if it doesn't have those guardrails in place, if it doesn't have that explainability, it can reinforce bias and toxicity just as much as it can eliminate it.
I mean, that's one of the things that I've seen. Like, I do several AI adoption surveys over the last year. I've done several, and CX and development, IT, those use cases are really exciting, and companies are really invest in there. But it almost seems like the opposite is true on the back end, legal, HR, even finance to some extent. There's a big lag in how AI is being applied and what technologies being deployed, not available, because certainly a lot of technology is available uses AI, but it seems like companies are resistant.
I think part of that is the way it was initially approached. A lot of the HR technology vendors, when they first came to market with some of the generative AI tech, had very much a "don't you worry about it, just trust us" kind of mindset. And I think it bit them. I think it really bit them. And if you think about where we first saw adoption of AI in HR, it was around things like performance management with the idea of, let me draft a performance review for you, right? Didn't need a lot of context. I could give it a few words and it could craft something that would get me past the check test for HR. Not particularly valuable, but a lot of managers saved a lot of time. Now, did we get better performance reviews because of that? Absolutely not. But I think that performance management is an area that's fundamentally broken, an area where we have a real opportunity with AI when we can take, for example, that rewards and recognition data that I was talking about before and have some standard and consistent processes where we start to call that as part of the performance review process, where I really understand in context over the course of a year how my peers have recognized me and how my managers recognize me. And that sort of data-driven approach becomes our performance management system, as opposed to the sort of once a quarter, sit down together, write the 5 things you wanted to do, write the 5 things you're supposed to improve, all those kind of processes and check boxes that were designed to complete requirement rather than to really drive business.
So when it comes to things about like performance management, right, that's very career impacting. How should our HR teams be thinking about transparency when we're using AI in those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that accuracy is not the same as trust. Right? So whether the technology, the AI is giving a correct answer or not is less important than how it's explained, how it's communicated, how we're helping employees and HR, frankly, understand how the technology works. And one of the things that I tell HR leaders when they're talking about, do I trust an AI solution, is it is not your job to understand the vendor technobabble to feel comfortable. It is their job to explain it to you in a way that you can understand and communicate back to the rest of your organization.
Makes sense.
A lot of this is about sort of the critical thinking skills, the sniff test, and do I understand this enough, and has it been explained well enough for me to be able to then feel comfortable with it?
And do you think that transparency is something that leaders should be putting out there to their employees when they're doing things like performance reviews? I know the last place I worked where we did performance reviews, they were just starting to use AI in the process. And so you could pull up the performance review and AI will have already drafted the paragraph that meets all of the qualifications on the rubric for that particular classification or category. And so I think as time went on, people began to see like the same answers to things and started to go, wait a minute, did you actually write this?
We're already seeing it now, right? We see anywhere there's an M dash somewhere, we assume that somebody's used Gen AI to do it.
Right.
No, I think that's the real danger with performance reviews. And again, we have to think about, why are we doing them, right? Because if you look at all of the tech layoffs that happened over the past couple of quarters, there were an awful lot of folks that were getting positive performance reviews that were a part of those RIFs. So what does that mean? Does it mean that performance reviews don't have anything to do with actual career development and sustainability? I can't believe that they were all blips. What I do believe is that we've gotten to a point with performance management where it is more performative than management. And that's where we really need to think about, how do we bring in data in a more consistent way in the flow of work, where we're doing this as a real way to drive sort of workforce planning and strategic employee development, and not just a checkbox item once and over.
Right.
I mean, it seems like in employee development, training, those areas, and we haven't really talked about that much, but I mean, those seem like ripe for this idea of personalization and really building out the capability to tailor that onboarding and training and ongoing training to your employees in a much better way than we've been able to do in the past. I mean, is that playing out?
I think so. And I think what we're seeing is a lot more personalized journey, not just for onboarding, but throughout the employee lifecycle. I'll give you an example. So I'm hesitating saying a specific vendor, but they are one of the ones doing it, I think, particularly well. Udemy. So for me as an employee, they can understand what my skills are. They can say, Rebecca, instead of this 8-week course that you need to complete on AI, we've determined that you've already mastered courses 1 through 5. What you really need to focus on is the second half of course 6. This is the area that's most relevant to your job and where you don't seem to have the mastery today. It can lay out those skills taxonomy, those skills trees based on what it finds in my resume, courses that I've taken, and really deliver a customized learning plan that can be designed to get me to whatever that next step is in the desired job, career that I want, or simply to upskill me in a level where I don't have the competencies today for my job. So you're doing some really, really interesting personalization down to here are the minutes of a particular course you should make sure that you master, rather than giving me a bunch of checklist training requirements that may not actually reflect what I know.
I mean, we've talked about skills-based organizations for a few years. I mean, this seems like a way that we actually might be moving towards that finally and enabling that with the technology.
I think the challenge with skills-based organizations, frankly, in the past, Mike, was HR drove skills-based organizations because they heard that it was interesting about a conference, went back to managers and said, look, now everyone has a talent marketplace so they can see what other manager they'd like to work for. Which didn't sit too well with a lot of managers.
Yikes.
Yikes.
Right? Yeah.
Right? The idea of an open market within my own company was very threatening to a lot of managers. I think what we're seeing now is business recognizing that they need to have a good handle on the skills that their employees have to understand what they can automate with HR, what they can't, and what job roles they need to retrain for. Also, what are those adjacent job roles where if I have someone whose job is going to be partially replaced by AI, I can train them up and retain them and not have that corporate knowledge, that institutional knowledge walk out the door. At the same time, line of business is going to HR saying, where's the data? And if HR doesn't have a plan pretty quickly for maintaining that data, again, getting around the politics and the other things that we talked about before, I think that job's going to get taken away from them. I think it's going to go more into a finance role where people are used to doing the sort of strategic planning around other resources, the P&L planning, and they're going to start to look at skills as part of that P&L profile rather than the HR profile.
Interesting,
yeah.
It's just too important now not to be able to, right? Particularly as I think about laying off folks in the future,
right,
or reskilling them in the future. I have to know what people know and what they do.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in the room for a lot of those discussions around who's on the list and who's not on the list through my career. And it's always a tough one, right? Because how much data do you really have when the list is long and, you're laying off 500 people? Right. Most of those people I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. So if you could have a way to actually build out that, profile in a much deeper way, that could go a long way towards that. That's interesting.
Well, I think too, as we look at sort of the waves of hiring and restructuring moving forward, unfortunately, a lot of questions about age and discrimination are going to be involved by the nature of the kind of jobs that are being replaced by technology. So we're going to have to be having more data-driven conversations, and organizations are going to have to protect themselves with consistent data-driven processes for these kind of layoffs, or they're going to find themselves in a lot of legal hot water.
Back to the transparency piece a bit there too, right? I mean, from a process perspective, that needs to be a fairly transparent process in how you approached it. And I guess the data has always been part of that issue, right? How do you get that data and be able to use it in making the decision? Because it's just for a lot of companies, such a difficult process.
Right.
Interesting.
So we've gone through a lot of really negative things here. Let's flip the script a little bit.
Should I stop saying layoffs? Yeah.
Well, there's got to be some good behind all of this, right? There's got to be some success stories. So can you give us an example of one where AI helped improve an employee experience in some massive way?
I think the benefits management one is a great one, Kristy, right? Where I'm saying, there's no way that an HR department, even with incredible resources at scale, could deliver that kind of personalized experience that is best for the employee. I think another area that we're looking at that I think is really interesting where AI plays a role is helping employees manage a financial stress, right? So helping them with financial coaching, with understanding what benefits are available to them, with making the most of those benefits. There's lots of interesting companies in the space that are, again, taking that limited amount of employee data to deliver them a very personalized experience. Financial stress is a big cause of absenteeism, of burnout, or lost productivity. Being able to provide employees with some of those tools that, again, offer the best of what AI has to offer, which is that sort of personalized experience that gives them real advice on their financial situation, is another area we're seeing interesting investments there.
I mean, that is interesting in ways, because that's a little more like, how do I help them as a complete person, not just as an employee, but it provides quality of life sort of issues and advice as well. Yeah,
in the long run, it pays off for the employer as well, right? Because most of these tools are not free, but not incredibly expensive. And if I can have an employee spending less time worrying about calling the credit card company, checking on bills during work hours, and we all know what's happening, right? I can get some of that productivity back, but also potentially get absenteeism down among frontline workers. There's a lot of potential benefit there.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we step back a minute and think about the HR function itself, I mean, what would you advise HR professionals to do now to prepare themselves for this? I mean, what skills do they need? What AI knowledge do they need as they go into this to be able to use those tools more effectively?
Sure. I think it is less a specific tool or a technology and more with getting more comfortable being uncomfortable. There's a bit of a,
I like it.
There's a data scarcity mindset in HR that says we have to have every bit of data ticked, tied, and perfect before we can make decisions around anything. And I think that what we're seeing is organizations recognize that we can't let good be the enemy of perfect or perfect be the enemy of good. Often,
that makes sense.
Often when I'm working with HR leaders to try to build a business case, they're like, well, we don't know if improved employee engagement is going to increase productivity by 1 or 2%. I'm like, the answer is it doesn't matter, right? The answer is at 1 or 2%, given the benefit, does that make sense for the project to move forward or not? So I think taking a step back to understand a little bit more how finance thinks about data and applying some of that from a scenario planning perspective to HR and the workforce is not a bad idea.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if you were talking to this in our last show when we had a practitioner in one of the areas we sort of focused on a lot, and this just sort of strikes me when you're talking about skills. I mean, from an individual perspective, and Kristy, your example I thought was good, that some companies are now saying, hey, we're not really using AI, we promise. I mean, what do people do to prepare themselves to get a job, to function in this kind of new HR system as an employee?
We're seeing more focus on the ability to learn and showing adaptability rather than appropriateness for a particular job role or a particular resume checklist.
The interesting part of that is you don't get past the original applicant tracking system without the resume checklist and the role qualifications, right? So it's kind of a catch-22.
And it's interesting too, Kristy, because everybody who's applying for jobs right now says it's unfair I don't get considered, right? Because I don't check those boxes. And everybody on the technology vendor side is saying fraud, applicant quality, all of those things are way down.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So there's gaming going on both sides, certainly.
And so
I mean, you wouldn't blame a prospect for going to AI to optimize a resume to get through AI, right? I mean, that makes sense to me.
Right. Well, and I mean, how much of that is perpetuated by the fact, so obviously I'm living in this world right now, but you go out to LinkedIn and a job that was posted yesterday, there's already over 100 applicants have applied.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like this self-perpetuating cycle. Like how do you stop the flood of applicants so that actually people who are qualified that you would want to work with are the ones that are seeing it? If we're going to use AI to do some of this, can we use AI to sometimes target those application openings maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you do that?
I will say one area that I've found very interesting is the AI interviewing space. And then originally I was very negative on it. But talked to some organizations that were using it to say, let me offer anyone who applies without a resume screen the opportunity to participate in an AI interview.
Mm-hmm.
Now they can choose not to, but what it enables me to do is broaden my net, give everyone an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I rank them based on obviously NLP scoring their answers and that sort of thing. What they also found is it kicks out a lot of folks that were artificially creating their resumes and artificially applying.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's really interesting. I'm in a WhatsApp group I'm a part of Chief, right? And we have all of these different WhatsApp groups, and one of them is people looking for their next opportunity. And somebody posted in there about the AI interview, and somebody said, there's no way I'm going to do that. If you can't talk to me in person, don't talk to me. I'm worth your time. So there's an interesting dichotomy there, because I see what you're saying. We may be able to get more people into this process if they do that AI interview. But I see the other side of it where if I'm not worth your time, I'm not going to do an AI interview.
Yeah, and as I said, I was initially very, very negative about it. But in talking to folks that were using it, they said, look, we can't possibly, given the volume of applicants that we get today, address every candidate. So rather than using what we agree is an iffy initial screening process, right? Give everybody a shot.
Yeah. I mean, we in our last show when we had Dave Falk, who from G2, he had actually experimented with this over the last year, and was talking about exactly that it helped them increase the ability to talk to more people, so they actually got a better candidate out of the process because they were able to broaden the lens. So that actually makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Although I could see why you'd be negative on it too. It is a little scary if you think about it.
Well, not even scary, but one of the things that I think is big for women right now is knowing your worth and asserting your worth and making sure that people are recognizing you for being worth what you are. And so it's almost like that is in direct contrast to, and I'm going to have an AI give you this first interview. And I think that's a little bit where that's coming from, but it's an interesting dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's also one of those things that it sounds a little ominous, but I could see where this kind of goes to a conversation around bias and inherent bias and things like that. I mean, how is that something that's being discussed a lot when we talk about resume screening and AI interviewers? Has that come up, and how do they deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of talk there, particularly with the Workday lawsuit around what is the responsibility of the vendor, what's the responsibility of the company acquiring the talent, where does that responsibility lie and how am I transparent in that? I think we all recognize that AI is created and trained by people, and people inherently have bias. I think what we're going to see is a lot more questions about these different technologies. Do they reinforce existing biases as they're alleging in the Workday suit? Or is it the vendor / technology user's responsibility to screen and protect for that? The interesting thing that we've seen looking at the HR technology in AI space is there are not a lot of folks putting policies in place for how this stuff is to be used, right? So only about a third of organizations today have a policy on the use of generative AI.
Yeah.
There's a lot that still needs to be done in terms of what are the rules of the game here? What are the rules of the game we put in place internally? And how do we help people embrace change with not just the technology, but the culture and the process and the best practices that go along with all of that?
Mm.
Right.
I mean, we know there's some bias in the foundation models themselves, right? And when you train a foundation model on the internet, guess what? There's bias in the data.
Right.
So it seems like there's a lot of risk around that in my, just from the fact that is how it's trained. You've got to build the right guardrails on top of it, I guess.
Right. Right.
Interesting. I mean, one of the things, because this kind of takes me to the next question that I was thinking about is around failure. And, I've said a lot, and when you talk about agentic AI, you have to think about failure modes, right? Because it is going to fail. I mean, that is an autonomous agent will fail at some point. So from an HR perspective, I mean, what kind of failure modes do you design there? And then, how can HR go wrong, in this kind of failure scenario?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about before about accuracy versus trust, right? This is not just about getting the correct answer. This is about the way it's communicated, the way it's conveyed, and whether it actually serves the need that the employee had or not. And I think we've set a bar low. We've set a bar pretty low by saying if it gives me a correct answer or tells me it doesn't know, that we've solved the issue. I think there's a lot more that we can expect from that. And I think we're going to see companies start to think a lot more about what's the tone of an HR agent? Is that different from the tone of a customer service agent? Is it different from company to company? And how do I really take advantage of the best of AI and the best of humans to deliver an employee experience that ultimately makes that employee more productive?
Yeah. That is interesting. I know one of the things as a leader I always really tried to do was make sure that I had a relationship with my employees. I've worked for people who haven't felt that way, and I've worked with people who don't feel that way. But my philosophy was always, some night at 2:00 in the morning, when something goes down and somebody calls me, I may have to call you. And I want to have that capital in the bank with my employees that, we've got a good relationship and they're not just going to roll over at 2 a.m. and go, oh, it's her, and roll back over and go back to sleep, right? They're going to go, oh, she's calling me. It must be important.
Mm-hmm.
How are you advising organizations to balance what they get from AI efficiency with making sure that human connection is still there and the employee relationships are still there?
I think it's a real challenge right now with HR to think about what that relationship is moving forward. Because if they are not the steward of culture and people data, they are the custodian and they are the enforcer. And that's not a very happy role to be in.
Right.
I think we're seeing a lot of folks look at the sort of transformational HR leadership, and that takes a different skill set than the traditional sort of HR leader. I think we're also seeing a tremendous amount of pressure on managers who have not had experience necessarily managing in an uncertain economic time before. So a lot more thinking about the compatibility of skill sets. And I'm not talking about can they code or those sorts of things. I'm talking about the soft skills. We're seeing a lot more interesting investment in areas like soft skills where I want to understand what people's adaptability and flexibility, negotiation skills, all of those kind of things. I think we put a lot of technology out there to try to correct during COVID for managers not being able to walk around. I think what we found is that a lot of managers weren't very good at managing, and the technology reinforced that in a lot of cases, right? So the technology will only do so much, and the challenge with AI is it's an accelerant, right?
Yeah.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Bad practices streamlined are still bad practices.
Right.
Making them more efficient is not necessarily a good thing.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, it makes sense. I say that a lot about sales tech. If you do more of the wrong thing, you don't actually get any better results.
Right.
Interesting. If we step back a minute and just let's get the crystal ball out for a minute. I mean, what do you think as an HR leader, over the next 18 to 24 months? I mean, what should they be experimenting with to stay ahead, and perhaps what should they avoid?
I think like anybody else who's looking to stay ahead, it is experimenting with the different AI tools. It is also working on those critical thinking skills, right? One of the most important things moving forward across the board is going to be, how do I determine whether I do what the AI is telling me to do or not? Whether I'm a human sitting in my home getting phished by an AI scam or somebody at the office, right? If we look at the big Salesforce, and I shouldn't say Salesforce breach because it was, but it wasn't, right? The employees that were duped into providing information that got outside actors into their Salesforce accounts. It's a classic example of sort of the critical thinking skills that we have disencouraged in a large swath of the workforce for a long time. So how do we rethink that I'm the boss and I said so mentality to introduce the critical thinking skills that are going to be super important across the board going forward?
Yeah. I mean, it's human capabilities are still extremely important, and that's still a differentiator from a business perspective. I think that's true across all of the different functions that I've seen as they embrace AI, but I guess in HR particularly important when you talk about employee development and then even hiring the right people, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing too to think about for HR is traditionally HR has thought very differently about things like productivity from other parts of the business, right? If I go to sales and marketing and say, I'm going to make you 10% more productive, everybody goes, great, my commissions go up, right? If I go to HR and say, I'm going to make your HR team 10% productive, they say, who am I going to cut?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. The difference is I think HR has a real opportunity today, if they seize it, to say all of those things that we have always said, I just can't do because I've got to get payroll out or I've got to get performance or whatever it is, all of those things that they couldn't get to, they're really strategic. They now have an opportunity to really move the needle on some of those things if they play their cards right. So I think it's a challenging time, but also a very exciting time to be in the HR tech space.
Well, that's a pretty good nail in the end of the episode. That was a good way to end, a great segue. That's all we have time for today, Rebecca. You survived the hot seat. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. This was fun. I appreciate it.
And to everybody else out there, if you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. That's your In the Hot Seat episode for today. Thanks so much for being with us this week. I am Kristy Tupper.
And I'm Michael Fauscette. Tune in next time for different faces, different topics, and different perspectives as we put somebody different in the hot seat.